Here's a special important message.
Oh, well, hello. Welcome to episode 5 of We Are the Road Crew. My name is Stephen Hill, your host for this podcast. I just want to say before I go any further with today's show, apologies for the tardiness on our part over here at Road Crew Towers for not giving you a podcast for the last couple of weeks. I'm very, very sorry about that. Both myself and my colleague Ben, who put the show together, we have been very busy between the two of us over the last few weeks. I could give you a load of old excuses about why I've been doing this, I've been doing that. Alternatively, I could just say, look, it's really none of your business. This is a free podcast. Give me a break. But what I will do, I think, is just say sorry and then move on to this week's episode, which features a gentleman called Steve Carr, who has been a front of house engineer for many, many, many years and has worked with some of the biggest names in the world of music from this millennium, I guess you would say. He's mixed a plethora of bands from some of the biggest indie and pop acts of this generation all the way through to big festival stages and onto, which I'm sure we will get onto, classical music. I don't think we've really spoken to anyone on the show before who has been involved with classical music, opera, quite a lot of different stuff. So Steve's done an eclectic series of artists over his career, and I'm very much looking forward to delving in and finding out what the difference is between mixing a band like Goldfrapp, who he's worked with, or Chris Rea, who he's also worked with, and Katherine Jenkins, which seems like quite an eclectic group of artists, those three. Just that Venn diagram of those three artists doesn't seem to happen very much. So it should be a very, very interesting chat. Do please leave us a review on iTunes. I know I've already had a go at you for just inquiring why we haven't had a podcast for the last couple of weeks, but please, I would appreciate a review. Do tell your friends. You can follow us on social media. We can find us on Facebook. We're at Road Crew Pod on Twitter if you want to give us a follow as well, and we would appreciate any feedback at all. If you've got anyone that you want to hear me talking to about the world of music, behind the scenes in the world of live music, then give us a shout and give that person a shout out, tag them in, and we'll get in touch with them, and you'll hear them on an episode soon. So you can do that. I'll probably recap all this at the end, but for now, here's me chatting to Steve Carr. All right, Steve, thank you very much for joining us. How are you?
Thanks for having me. Yeah, very good.
Good.
Yeah, very good, thanks.
Yeah.
A bit knackered, but all good.
Bit knackered. You were telling us about the sort of difficulties of just getting out of the house these days before we started recording. We were supposed to have this chat about,
how many times?
A couple of times.
Yeah, I think about 6, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's been a few, but you're a busy man.
Well, yeah, since I've had a kid, I'm an extra busy man now, yeah.
So
just trying to get out of the house with a baby. Trying to get out of the house with a baby has proven difficult for me.
Trying to get out of the house with a baby when you're in the sort of line of work where you need to be out of the house fiddling with monitors and
it's quite essential that I can get out, isn't it?
Yeah, you can't really work from home if you're doing the sort of the sound at the pyramid stage at Glastonbury, can you?
No, not really. You can't really do that remotely, can you? I'm
sure one day you'll be able to.
People would like to.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just every time I leave my house now with it's like I'm doing a loadout. It's like I'm loading out of a gig. It's like I'm loading in. So in that sense, I suppose I'm quite well prepared for it. But yeah, it's a bit tiring. But I made it. I got here in one piece.
You got here, and
I dropped the baby off somewhere in Liverpool Street.
That's nice. Good. Wow.
Jumped on the train.
Not just anywhere, hopefully. But yeah. So let's
with its mother.
Good. Let's go back to the start of your kind of connection with music. Can you remember the first time that you became inspired by music, the first time you kind of got yourself into music?
Yeah, I can. I mean, I always loved music. As a really young kid, I remember having like the La Bamba album in my bedroom and used to listen to the Prodigy tapes and things like that when I was really young.
Diverse.
But yeah, I've always had a really really diverse taste in music. But I mean, I suppose I didn't really know that like music was my calling when I was a kid. But it was the real kind of engaging moment for me was in secondary school. I met a group of kids, started hanging around with them they were all into like heavy metal bands,
right?
And they all played guitar. And I was one of those naughty kids that when their parents went away on the weekend, I had a house party and invited everyone over, and one of them picked up the guitar. I had a guitar that I couldn't play, sat in the corner. One of them picked it up and started playing it, and I was like, "Oh man, can you teach me how to play?" You know, so they showed me a couple of power chords and Nirvana, Nevermind come out at the time. It was just like the new album out, and that was it. I was kind of like hooked on trying to learn to play all the songs on Nevermind, and
such a big album.
And that was it. And I mean, and at the time I was listening to like jungle and drum and bass and stuff like that, and chart music, and so I started learning to play guitar, and then that was it. That was when I kind of really started to sort of throw all of my spare time into music.
Yeah, it's an amazingly similar sort of. I mean, I think I was a bit like that, and I think I know so many people listening will probably from sort of our similar age group will go, yeah, I remember that. I was 1 minute I was into New Kids on the Block, or 1 minute I was into jungle, or I was into
there was a pivotal
chart music, Paula
where
Abdul or something, and Michael Jackson, and then suddenly this record comes out, and it just felt like everybody. Certainly, I remember in my school, suddenly everybody was going from just kids to wearing these long sleeve Nirvana,
grungers.
Green Day, Pearl Jam, Red Hot Chili Peppers, all these things just happened. Like looking back now, I feel really lucky to have grown up in that time. Do you know what I mean? Do you get that? And we sort of think back,
absolutely.
It was an unbelievable time to be growing up.
It was, I suppose, at that age as well. I mean, we're talking like sort of 12, 13, 14 years old. You're beginning to find your own identity, and then to be able to identify with a movement in art, you know, and I suppose it's quite a powerful thing that's kind of stuck with a lot of people in our generation, I think. Yeah,
for sure.
You know, especially some of the ideas behind it as well, like the message that was there in a lot of the music. Yeah, it was a pivotal moment for me. Yeah, getting into guitar music.
Yeah. What about experiencing live music for the first time as well? Because I think that is quite an important. Obviously, you know, that's your bread and butter. That's your livelihood.
Yeah, well, I never knew I wanted to do it.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So, what did you remember the first gig you went to? Experiencing the smell and the sound and the feel of the crowd.
I can't remember a lot since. Like a lot of the ones I've done in between with work and stuff. But the first one was Bush at Brixton Academy when they released 16 Stone. And it was like a British band that sounded like the Seattle sound, but it had that British kind of edge to it, didn't it? Gavin Rossdale's voice was just incredible in that album. And there was a song on that album called Glycerine that just I completely fell in love with, and then just fell in love with the band, and somehow managed to convince my parents to let me go to Brixton on my own, or with my mates from school. Yeah. God knows how I managed to convince them to let me go. We must have been like 15, 16.
I think I know
from
exactly
Romford,
what tour that was. I think that must have been 95, kind of mid to late 95 on the 16 Stone tour. Yeah. I played that album. Bush are a very derided band, or they got, you know, the NME and the sort of the hoity-toity music press at the time who were obsessed with the Britpop thing. They didn't take nicely to Bush at all. No. But those first two Bush albums
albums. Yeah.
So great.
Yeah. The Razorblade Suitcase has got some amazing tunes on it. And the production, I think it was it was the same guy that Did In Utero produced it.
Steve Albini.
And it sounds amazing. The drums on it sound incredible. Yeah, those first two albums, I must admit, they never really reach those heights again after that for me. I mean, I followed them for a few years afterwards, but that first show, Bush, Brixton Academy, I think 4 of us somehow managed to climb onto the barrier at the front and do it. It's funny because we were just talking about stage dives. It wasn't quite a stage dive, but it was like a crowd surf. Managed to do it, and of course it seems like such a great idea, and then you lose your mates, and you've got to get up from Brixton.
Your wallet and your shoe.
On your own. So that was the first and last time I ever did a crowd surf.
Right, okay.
And I lost my place at the front as well, of course. You know,
but presumably full of adrenaline and excitement.
Yeah, it was incredible. I no lie. I mean, my ears were ringing for a whole day the next day, which is not a good thing, of course. No. But yeah, it was incredible. I mean, it's a game changer, really.
So what kind of path did that then put you onto, and how did you sort of, was there a moment, or did you remember a moment where you started to think, well, I wouldn't mind sort of being in these situations a little bit more and maybe earning some money from it?
I wanted to be on stage. I wanted to be a musician, all almost all sound engineers, a failed musician of sorts. In that I was I wanted to be in a band. Yeah. Basically, that was the way. That was how it made me feel. And of course, learning to play the guitar and having buddies that played guitar, and that it wasn't hard for us to get together and start writing songs. And and then one of the guys was like, well, I can play a bit of drums, and so we all chipped in together and bought a drum kit, and so that was how it went. And actually, I threw a lot of time into that through my late teens and into my early 20s. But obviously, I had to get a job. I had to earn some money, and there was only one job that I could see that resembled even remotely what it would be like to be a musician, and that was to work with musicians in the studio recording, like producing and recording. So I opted for a music technology course when I left school, and I was very lucky to get accepted and went to the City of Westminster College, and I did 2 years there. And that basically laid the foundations for me to get a job with a sound company, with a sound hire company. And so then I was like, I had my band, and then alongside that I had this like kind of potential career that was in a similar vein, running alongside it. So I felt like I had a couple of bases covered at quite a young age. So it kind of felt good, at the time. I felt like I was on a good path. There was a little bit of a nervy moment where I left college, and because to get me through college, I was working for my dad as a plumber, and I was doing labouring and that sort of stuff. And there was a nervy 6 weeks where I finished college, and obviously I'd written all these letters to like Abbey Road and all the various studios and that, and just no replies. I think I got one reply back, through the post. Sorry, but we're not taking any applicants, and that. 6 weeks go by and no jobs are coming up, and I start thinking, okay, maybe I'm going to have to be a plumber for now to get me through. Yeah. And landed an interview with a sound company in Wimbledon.
Right. What about the band at that time? Was it still? I mean, do you want to give your band the shout out and that what you guys were called and how? Did you achieve any? Was it like within touching distance at all? This kind of dream?
Far from it.
Right. Okay.
Far from it. I mean, we had a great time. It was a great social life. We had brilliant experiences, and we had a lot of fun. It was great to have a creative outlet in your late teens as well. I think it's probably good for you. Young men to have that outlet, kind of keeps you out of trouble, if you like. Yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, we had a few different incarnations, played some cool shows, won a few competitions and that, but no, never got a deal, never got any management or anything like that. No. I did have another little stab at it in my mid-20s. I just went solo, and that was a bit more successful.
Right, okay. Yeah. We'll come to that in a little bit. But we'll go back, as you mentioned, your job in Wimbledon with a company, actually working within the music industry. With that, must have been pretty exciting initially, but also a little bit daunting. Yeah.
It was exciting in that I had a job. I could go back to my parents and sort of stick two fingers. I'd say, see, look, I'm going to work in the music business, because they told me that it was never going to happen, So it was exciting in that sense, and then daunting on the first day when you go in there and it's like, wow, this is what's going on, and it's just some dusty old warehouse full of loads of old broken speakers and a load of grumpy, jaded roadies who are like not interested in a young, an 18-year-old sort of upstart, and going in there and making tea basically and sweeping up and emptying the bins, and kind of, this is not really what I thought it was going to be like. But I think I had a bit of faith that there was a ladder to be climbed if I kind of needed to.
Right. It's a funny one, this, because I always think back to, like, when you talk about being a sort of 18, 19-year-old, when I was absolutely obsessed with music, and I used to listen to records all the time, I used to buy CDs all the time, I used to go to as many gigs as I possibly could. But the idea of walking into a room and someone going, make that band sound the way they sound on a record, make them sound, that's suddenly a very difficult and quite a daunting thing. Like, I was in a band as well, and as soon as I got into studio, I was like,
like a rabbit in the headlights.
Drum tracks sound nice, I have no idea. So how was that sort of feeling of you going, because I think a lot of people try and get into the music industry on the basis of you know, I crowd surfed at Bush.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
now I want to be on it. But the reality of how difficult it is to make those things sort of tick.
So, so the band thing really helped me because I had a 4-track machine in my bedroom, and I had like an Atari ST, and I kind of, you know, my college course taught me how to do sequencing, and I was writing a lot on my own in my bedroom, and I was recording a lot, and so I suppose unwittingly I was kind of learning how to do sound, if you like, you know, before it was ever really called upon for me to do it to make money. Yeah. So by the time I got my job and I kind of started to get a few opportunities working with actual bands, of course the first jobs you get you don't get to walk up to a mixer and off you go. You know you're doing monitors for this, you know, doing monitors for so and so, or you're doing front of house for this band. It's not like that. You know, you start off plugging in the mics, you know, and packing down the gear and loading the trucks, and then you start standing on the shoulder of the guy who's operating the desk and being his babysitter or her babysitter, you know, and like plugging in their bits and pieces for them and helping them, and then they start showing you little bits and pieces, and you start to kind of learn the methodology, you know, you start to learn the way to approach it, and then when you are given the opportunity, you kind of, by that, well, for me anyway, I was kind of like chomping at the bit for it. But I mean, it took a few years to get to that stage. And I do think that a lot of the stuff that I was doing in my private life really helped, because it was, you know, I wasn't just doing it at work. I was obsessed with it outside of work as well. So if I wasn't in the warehouse putting together sound equipment, I was going to a gig and setting up my own backline. Yeah. You know? Do
you think you need to have a bit of an ear for it anyway? Do you know what I mean? Because I think there are some people who just can't hear... like, with all due respect to people.
If you heard me sing, you might say that about me.
But do you know what I mean? There are some people, I think, who just, they hear music kind of flatly, then on a kind of whatever it's like. You know, I've spoken to people at gigs before, and actually the gig we were talking about, a gig I went to last night, and one of the bands I saw had a different guitar player from they had a standing guitar player, and I was like, God, they sounded really different tonight, didn't they? Sounded much kind of sort of choppier, and my mate was like,
so it's difficult for people to articulate what they're hearing sometimes, or people articulate what they're hearing in different ways. And then if you have technical understanding of what you're hearing, then there's like a common language that you can talk, you know, that you can speak in with your, you know, with other people that listen to it in a more technical way. But there's also, like a real sort of esoteric edge to it. You know, there is something about sound that you can't quite put your finger on. It in many cases, it is just personal taste. And quite often, like the most sort of successful or most commonly referred to as being like a great sounding record or whatever, is that way because it just sounds good to the most people. Yeah. You know, like there will still be critics of it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And so in answer to your question, whether or not do I think you just got to have an ear for it, I think you have to have a desire to want to try to understand it more.
Right, okay.
I think
that makes sense, yeah.
And then once you start to delve deeper and go down into that rabbit hole, you think more and more things start to click, and you start to understand the language of it, if you like. Yeah, I suppose that's the way I see it.
Yeah, sure. Well, anyway, let's move on. So you told me before we started that your first tour wasn't quite the rock and roll tour that you thought it might be. Tell us about the first act that you went on the road with.
The Shaolin Monks, Wheel of Life, Kung Fu Buddhist monks.
I sort of remember this happening. So what year would this have been?
So this would have been 1999 or 2000, 2001. I mean, that was around when they started, and then they just went on and on and on. And I was, like I said, you know, I was working in the warehouse, and the tour was going out, and they needed a lackey who could just throw a few surround sound speakers up each day. And so someone suggested, why don't you take Steve out on the road? You know, he'll be up for it. We'll pay him a pittance. You know, he'll do anything. Yeah. So, and I was well up for it. So I went out on this tour. You know, and I think I was 18, and I was the youngest on the tour bus by over 10 years easily, with a load of hardened old lampy roadies and an old crazy old Australian production manager, you know, and Yeah, it was an eye opener. It was a real eye opener. Each day I had to go in. I had like 12 of these speakers on little rigging frames, and I just had to we were going into all the various theatres around the country, and I just had to take a load of cable and a couple of speakers and some rope and go right up into the roof of these old theatres and find places to hang these speakers onto safely, hang them, tie them off, get them plugged in and get it all done in time for the show. And all they used to put through them was the sound of birds tweeting and water running and stuff like that to make the venue feel like this kind of Chinese Buddhist garden,
Right.
And that was my role on it, yeah. And I actually ended up mixing the show within about 4 years. I think I ended up doing front of house on it.
Really?
Yeah. I kind of just, every time it went out, I stuck with it, and then I ended up being the person that just knew the show better than anyone else, and eventually I ended up on the front of house desk mixing it.
It's the sort of thing when you're 18,
yeah,
and you're going, I'm going to be a roadie for a rock and roll band, and you're out with
the Shaolin Monks.
Yeah. I've spoken to a few people on this podcast about the stories of debauchery with everyone from Queen to Black Sabbath.
Right, okay.
But I imagine how much sort of
different
hang time did you have with the Monks?
I had loads of hang time with the Monks.
And how did you get on with them? And how
much
different
hang
is that
time
to
with
the rest of?
I mean, looking back on it now, I think I took it for granted. I had no idea how unusual that job would be, and how amazing it was. Really, I mean, we did a tour of Italy where we taught. I think we were out there for like a month, and we did like every town that had an amphitheatre in Italy.
Yeah,
and a lot of rock and roll bands just don't do that. People just can't afford to go and tour all the way around Italy. It's not really done. Most tours, you'll do a Milan show, a Rome show, you might do one in the south, and kind of that's it. So things like that, getting to see countries like that. We went to Lebanon. We did a show in Beirut. We stayed in this hotel with a swimming pool on the roof because it was the only hotel in Beirut where tourists could stay. And I remember up there in the afternoon swimming around, looking out across the skyline, and there was just all these bombed out high rises everywhere you looked. 80% of the buildings were just still bombed out from the war.
Yeah.
And there were soldiers on the streets and stuff. And it was kind of at the time I just thought, I've seen it on the news and now I'm seeing it for real. But looking back on it, I think actually that was quite an incredible time to go, really, because just after that it all really kicked off. Yeah. And we still managed to go nightclubbing one night in Beirut and walk back on my...
With the Monks?
With some of the Monks.
Really?
Yeah, of course, yeah. So we did some amazing stuff with them. The Monks were awful. They were the worst. They gambled, they smoked, they drank.
Did they?
They ate meat. Oh yeah, they were womanizers.
Wow.
They were more rock and roll than any band I've worked with.
Really?
Yeah. And they aged from 80 to 8, and there were about 30 of them.
Fucking hell!
Yeah, but the naughty boys were the ones in the middle, and they were at it all the time. They were out getting drunk. So I suppose they'd go out the night before, on a day off, the night before a show. They'd go out gambling, drinking whiskey. They'd be up all night in the hotel bar and everything. And then the next day they'd be laying on beds of nails and doing headstands and having sticks broken across between their legs and things like that. So I suppose, you'd probably want to be a bit hungover if you were going to take that sort of punishment.
Yeah, so you got to have an outlet. If you're getting smacked with a bit of wood and laying on nails is your job.
That's it.
I don't begrudge them a couple of glasses of whiskey.
Exactly, yeah. I'm going to break this iron bar over my head. So
that's mad.
Yeah, so it was a funny time, yeah.
That's a myth debunked from the road, I think, because I wouldn't have expected
But they were Buddhists. I mean, there's no doubt about it. They were Buddhists, but they weren't good Buddhists. They were naughty Buddhists. Very naughty Buddhists.
Naughty Buddhists.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how did after doing? So, obviously, you've had this tour with the Shaolin Monks, and obviously it sounds like you had a good time.
Yeah.
Sounds like a good time. Cool. Did that kind of give you a thirst to go back to the day job and go, look, get me out on more of these, and let's do more stuff.
I took it a lot more seriously after that first tour. Yeah, because I had people mentoring me on the road that were kind of like showing me, this is a career choice for you. I never even really knew it existed. I got into it because I thought I wanted to be in the studio, and I landed this job at a hire company. It was the only place that would take me. But because I had the big mixing desks and the speakers and everything, I was kind of into it. And then I went on the road and realised there was this whole other world that I didn't even really kind of consider as a job option. So when I got back from that, I was kind of like, I had a bit of a bug for it. So I was like, put my hand up, anything else comes in, I'll go and do it. I'll be the third man on any job. And the next one that came in was Chris Rea.
Right.
Yeah.
How was that?
Yeah, good. Yeah. A lot of fun, a lot different from the Monks.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah.
I mean, in every way, it seems like it would be quite different. But then I don't know if Chris Rea. I mean, again, he seems like on the surface you would imagine Buddhist monks to be quite relaxed, and you'd also think Chris Rea to be a sort of an older gentleman who's done his time on the road and is a bit more sort of middle of the road and
like
a calmer touring experience.
Yeah, like soft and calm, and like his music, kind of like soft around the edges, and that. No, complete opposite.
Again, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Grumpy old sod.
Is it?
Yeah. Oh yeah. But he's a lovely man. He's a lovely bloke. But he's got a great personality. But most of the time, he's just grumpily taking the piss out of you and poking you, trying to get a rise out of you all the time. Yeah, he's just kind of like, you never know which Chris you're going to get either. Like, some days he'll come in and he'll be all smiling at, all right, all right, mate, he's a proper proper Geordie. He's not lost any of that working class edge to him at all. He's just like the sort of bloke you'd bump into in a chip shop, in Middlesbrough. And then another day he'll walk in and it'll be like a storm cloud over his head, and you're like, what have I done? What's happened? What have I said? And whatever, but then he'll just come out with something hilarious, that you just weren't expecting. It's just, not what you'd expect at all.
So what sort of venues were you playing around this time of Christmas? Because so this would have been just after, were you talking kind of
so
early
this was like his Stony Road tour. So
right.
I went out and did the second half. So I went out and did like the UK bit.
Yeah.
So it's just all like the sort of 1,500, 2,000 seater theatres around the UK. So he had a bit of time out. He had pancreatic cancer. He was given a 1 in 3 chance of surviving.
Yeah.
And three guys on the ward. This is the story he tells. 3 guys on the ward all had it. 2 of them died. He lived. He was the 1 in 3 that made it. It sort of changed his life. He kind of decided that he wanted to pursue blues music. That was always his love. Gave up on the kind of what the A&R wanted, what the labels wanted, and he just did what he wanted. Wrote this album, Stony Road, and it was like the biggest album he'd released in years. It went really well. So I went out on that, and it sold really well. It's like full houses everywhere. But I was just plugging mics in. I wasn't mixing it.
No,
not then.
Right.
Yeah.
And after Chris Rea, I mean, because obviously we'll get to the point where, just before we started this, you said, kind of Glastonbury Pyramid Stage is a big time of the year for you. So you kind of get to that point. Can you kind of trace the steps back from plugging in mics on a Chris Rea tour in front of 1,500 people to being sort of in charge of that desk at Glastonbury? That's quite obviously, some transition.
Yeah.
So what are the sort of potted highlights that took place over that period?
Okay, so I was doing my own stuff. I built my own recording studio, and I was doing a lot of mixing at home, and I was getting pretty good at it in the studio. And then obviously I was going out on the road with bands and stuff, with people like Chris Rea, and I was doing more and more of that sort of thing. And then I landed a job with a Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. Okay, doing this job called Classical Spectacular, which is a huge classical show that they do at the Royal Albert Hall, Birmingham, Manchester arenas. And the company that I was working for, R.G. Jones, they did the sound for it, and they just gave me an opportunity to mix it. They were like, we think you're ready to do this, and it's like 100 inputs. It's like mixing a full orchestra. And I was shitting it. But I fronted it up. I was like, oh yeah, I can definitely do this. I'm well up for it. I kind of fronted it out. And we did it. We they put me on the job. Birmingham NIA, I had the guy that used to mix it sat next to me. And I did it. And they loved it. And it just went from there. So I started doing all these classical shows, And the thing with what we do is, I think a lot of people in rock and roll kind of think that classical's harder than it really is, and a lot of people in classical think rock and roll's harder than it really is. But actually, in my opinion, like, if you get it and you're good at one, you can do the other, and it's actually not that big of a transition to move from one to the other. For me, it wasn't anyway.
Right.
So I was doing a lot of classical, and then an opportunity came up to do Goldfrapp on the Head First tour. Okay, the guy that was mixing it had something happen, and he'd gone through all the production rehearsals. He got to the first day of the tour, and he pulled out and said he couldn't do it, but he put me forward to do it, and so that was it. I was there. I was at the desk. I had his show file, so it was his mix, and I just had to basically operate the show with the other member, Will Gregory of Goldfrapp. So it's Alison Goldfrapp and Will Gregory. He stands on your shoulder, next to you at the mixing desk, because he's the producer. He knows about the technology and everything. And to say that I felt nervous would be an understatement. The first show was at a festival in Dublin in this horrible tent. Sounded horrendous in there. Absolutely banged out, and that was the first time I heard them live. I faded up the mixing desk, and they walked out on stage, and I just had to do it there and then. I had to mix it.
Yeah.
And then that went really well, and I stayed on the tour, finished the tour with those guys, and then I kind of got a bit of a name for doing female vocalists. So from that job, I then got Marina and the Diamonds. Yeah. And I had that from the beginning, so I was able to build my own mix and kind of like put my own stamp on it. So I did the Electra Heart tour with her, and then that led on to, I did another Goldfrapp tour after that, Tales of Us, which for me really that was when I sort of came into my own, and I really felt completely confident. I felt like I was at the top of my game at that point. Of course, I realise now that there's no such thing. Mixing is just a journey. It really is. You're always learning. But at that time, I remember feeling supremely confident. We did a show at Albert Hall, which was like one of the most exciting moments of my career. Yeah. And then I went back to Marina, did her next album, Fruit. Then I landed another female vocalist, Agnes Obel, and did a tour with her. And then I landed Birdy, and again another female vocalist. So I kind of become known for being the go-to guy for female vocals, and that kind of built me up to the point where I was a couple of years ago, basically. Right, and yeah.
You a fan of that stuff? I mean, it's coming from a sort of heavy metal background. How much of a fan are you? Have you become a fan of stuff like? Because I feel like, particularly you're talking about Goldfrapp,
really varied music,
very varied music, and huge hyped. Like pop stars, like proper pop stars back in the kind of mid to late noughties. Those guys were.
Goldfrapp particularly, yeah. I mean, Alison is one of the most wonderful people I've ever worked with. I absolutely adored working with her, and she's had a reputation for being tricky to work with, but absolutely not in my opinion. I think sometimes people's perceptions of artists are very, very different to the reality. Part of the art of what we do is going in and managing expectations and being a personality that puts them at ease and helps them feel confident, because ultimately they're putting their careers on the line every time they walk on stage. That's how a lot of them feel like sometimes. A lot of artists can feel quite insecure. So yeah. Yeah, what was... coming from sort of... I kind of went off on a tangent there.
You did, but it was...
I really did.
It's absolutely fine. Yeah. I was going to say, how much of a fan did you become of that music? Cause
that's right, yeah, sorry.
And with classical music, I mean, even more so, I guess, with classical music, because I think, although between heavy metal and classical music is obviously a very sort of strong connection between those two things, you don't often... I mean, they are very, very different, and that kind of beauty, something like Goldfrapp, the way I think of Goldfrapp is this sort of beautiful, clean, sort of crystalline, shimmering sound. And then Bush, we speak about Steve Albini earlier, and that, who wants stuff to sound dirty and gross and raw, and so it's a different...
I think that, well, for me, my real passion is sound.
Yeah.
And then music is a very, very close second to that, sound in music. So the more different something is, the more varied it is, the more exciting it is for me. Genuinely, that's how it is, and whether it's an orchestra, whether it's grimy synth-led pop, the key thing for me to work with it, to be infused by it, is that the quality of the songs are good, and that the sound quality of what they're giving me is good. Yeah. If either of those two things are a bit, off, then I sometimes have to like really dig deep to muster up the enthusiasm to kind of really get in, really get into it, get behind it. But I mean, that's what we're paid to do anyway. Of course, like you find that energy, even if it's not quite floating your boat, if you like. But I've never found it difficult to go across genres. I never have, honestly. I think going back, I mean, I know I said the pivotal moment for me was like to getting into the career was rock music, but before that, I listened to all sorts. So the transition from genres for me has never been difficult. In fact, I actually crave it, really. Yeah. I want that variation.
I think most people who are genuinely passionate about music, I mean, I'm the same. You mentioned Agnes Obel, who, I mean, some of my favourite albums this year, like death metal albums, but I do love, her records. Yeah,
some of the best shows I've ever seen. I was working with her, and it's and it's so sparse, some of it, but an amazing songwriter, and an amazing voice, an amazing sounding voice. So yeah, I've been very lucky in that respect.
And she's one of, I think, that to take it to where we are now in sort of 2019. Sorry, just to go off on a bit of a tangent about artists like that, as I think there's been so many recently. I think within, like I mentioned, rock and roll earlier, and it used to be when I was growing up, it was very much a male dominated and a male kind of characterized genre. But I think the type of music that women are making in 2019, there seems to be like a really unique way of femininity coming through within guitars and drums and sort of traditionally rock, or I don't know, not male-led sort of exclusively, but it's always been a very masculine sounding genre, and I love how in 2019 it feels like femininity has become such a massive part of that type of music for the first time in a very, very long time.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, working with Marina and the Diamonds, actually, I really felt that. I really felt like there was something changing, like in the mid-2000s with what she was doing, the message that she was kind of carrying. Because obviously we had the big girl power pop movement, which ultimately washed over most of us and felt most of it left us kind of cold, because I think we all saw through it as a manufactured machine that it was. But obviously the message behind it was important. And then other artists come along off the back of that movement. I think Marina being one of them. She I've seen more attitude coming off stage from her, a single woman, and a microphone than I've seen four lads with guitars. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I suppose the other thing we had when talking about when we were growing up, the whole Riot Girl thing with Hull, and there was, kind of L7 and Babes in Toyland, and there were a lot of, but it always felt to me like, as much as I liked a lot of those bands, it was like, we can be like men as well. Do you know what I mean? I don't really feel like that's the case now. It's like, no, our femininity is the key to this being sort of unique. And, I loved Hull, and I loved, a lot of the kind of the sort of early 90s Riot Girl bands and L7 and stuff like that. But that always felt to me like, we can do it like the guys.
The sound, you know what I mean? Is that because of the way it sounded, do you think? Because it's the production in all of those. Yeah. The production of those bands was similar to what the guys were doing. It was a similar kind of sound, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. And also, I mean, there's a documentary about L7, which is very good. I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head, but it's good. There's a documentary about L7, which is good. And they talk about how, they constantly felt like they had to go on stage and prove that they were as tough and as raw and as aggressive and as all those things, and those are all quite, masculine feeling or seemingly masculine emotions and masculine things, whereas someone like Chelsea Wolfe now, to me, is doesn't ever, it still feels hard and heavy and sort of intense, but very, very feminine, and there's no kind of pretense about, well, I have to act I have to keep up with what men do. Do you know what I mean? I think that's really cool. And like you say, that kind of mid-noughties period of music where, you know, there was a lot of those sort of acts coming through who started to just creak that door a little bit. So it's interesting that you were sort of in on all that.
Yeah, I suppose. Do you know what? I've never really sort of looked back at it in that way before, actually. But I suppose I was a part of it. Which is a nice feeling.
It's exciting.
Yeah.
So, you know, let's talk about Glastonbury, doing the pyramid.
Yeah.
Doing the pyramid stage at Glastonbury. Glastonbury is obviously the biggest festival in the world.
Oh, I think it probably is, isn't it?
I think that's fair to
like
say.
a small city, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, we've all been lost there.
Yeah, I would say.
All trying to find your tent there at like
it's
3 a.m. Yeah.
I mean,
it's huge. It's vast.
Huge.
It's insane. Trying to put a PA system into a field that big to cover that many people is such an unbelievable task. It is incredible that it even happens.
Yeah,
it really is. There are so many people, and there are so many things that have to work, that has to go right, in order for you to see Beyonce or Jay-Z or Kanye West appear on a honestly, it's incredible.
Yeah.
It blows your mind when you sort of see how it all works behind the scenes.
So
even working in the industry.
Yeah,
you know?
right, sure. So take us to the point, first time you kind of got offered it, how you felt.
Yeah.
The kind of logistical nightmare of putting it on, and I guess as well, the feeling of having done it, what that sort of means to you.
Okay, so the first time, how
it kind of came about, and how what your reaction to it was.
So I was on stage. I was working on stage. So the company R.G. Jones that I started out with were asked to come in and help. So I can't remember which year it was now. I think it was 2002 or something like that. I can't remember now. Anyway, they were asked to come in and help because they'd had so many noise problems in the past with off-site noise, basically. People that live in the villages around Glastonbury complaining about the sound all the time. They were trying to get the licence changed. They were trying to basically shut the festival down, believe it or not.
Right.
Even though it brings all that money in. So Archie Jones got involved. I was one of their main engineers at the time. And they were just brought in to provide a stage package and like the kind of there's the technology to make it all work, so to speak. And then another company were brought in to put in the speakers and manage the sound system. Okay, so I was just on stage managing all the changeovers, so pushing around the risers, plugging in the mics, unplugging the mics, plugging in the wedges, unplugging the wedges, just all day long. Getting a band on, getting a band off, getting a band on, just for the weekend. And it was like hardly got any sleep. It was absolute carnage. Any available moment that you got, you're trying to get out into the festival and get some ciders in you because you don't want to miss the opportunity. By the end of it, by the end of the week, I think I'd probably lost like half a stone in weight and hadn't had much sleep and had a great time, but I was absolutely exhausted. And then the next year we got asked back because it all went so well, and I did the same, and then so on and so forth, year on year. I kind of, because I knew the festival and I knew the people that were working there, and that I had an opportunity to go out to front of house and be the front of house babysitter. And I went out in front of house and I did that, and I looked after the guys, and it went quite well. And then the next year I got an opportunity to be project manager. So I ended up doing all of the pre-production and advancing with another guy called Marcus Bister, who's a really, really talented sound engineer, really talented audio production manager. So we work together as a team because there are months and months of pre-planning that go into this. Every single band that comes on the stage, you've got to get their rider, go through it. You've got to work out where we're going to find all of the microphones, what wedges do they want, what bits of outboard do they want, are they going to have their own desk, are they going to use our desk, there's so much stuff, and that's for every single band, so there's a lot of work that goes in beforehand. So the project managing side of it was a real step up for me. That was a huge step up to be able to put my name to that. And then obviously be on site and stand next to the desk and basically welcome the engineers as they come along. So we'd be like, right, okay, so who we got next? We've got we've got Leonard Cohen. There's a lot they're going to be coming in in half an hour. Their gear's being forked over now, So yeah, it was a period of about 5 years where I sort of slowly worked my way up to the point where I was actually kind of one of the kind of key players, if you like.
Yeah.
I actually got an opportunity to mix B.B. King as well, which was incredible. I mixed 2 bands in all the years I ever worked at Glastonbury. One of them was the local Glastonbury brass orchestra.
The town band.
Town band.
Yeah.
And the other one was B.B. King.
They must have played it more than anyone who's ever played Glastonbury, though. So to be fair, that is the record holder for the
I helped out with Tom Jones as well, because the guy faded it up and the whole thing just started feeding back. And everyone was like, oh my God.
Yeah. So B.B. King, I mean...
That was amazing to get to mix B.B. King. That was incredible. We couldn't believe it. So that all their guys turned up really late. We were like, B.B. King's on in 2 hours and no one's here. Like, what's going on? There's just a few blokes unloading a few bits of backline on the back of the stage.
Is that your kind of?
No one's been able to get hold of their production team. No one's had any information. We just know that B.B. King's coming, and it's like we don't know what to expect, And then they rock up like an hour before he's due on stage, and they're like, "Yeah, we don't have any crew. Like you guys can mix it. You guys can do the monitors. BB just wants a bit of this, a bit of that, and da. And everyone's just running around frantically, like miking up bits and pieces, just trying to get it all get it all together, because it's all being recorded for TV as well. You know. So we do the changeover, wheel him round, get him on, and then the band just start playing, and all the inputs just start coming up on the desk, and I'm on like a 40 channel Midas XL4, and there's another guy there, this Dutch guy who's an absolute legend, front house engineer. So he jumps on one end of the desk and I jump on the other. So I'm dialing up all the drums and he's doing all the brass, and BB's not even on stage yet. So we just get and the band are just jamming, and we just get them going, start getting all the compressors set and the gates going, and then BB walks out and everyone, like it's almost like they knew they gave us like sort of 5-10 minutes to get the mix sorted without, they didn't tell us they were going to do it, but that's just the way they did it. And then BB come out, sat down with his guitar, and it was one of the most awesome sets. It was brilliant. That was amazing. A highlight. That was a real highlight, actually.
I was going to say, it seems pretty obvious from what the story you just told in the sort of animated way that you told it as well. But I was going to say, having all those years at Glastonbury, like a lot of people, I guess, after this long, get a bit jaded. They could get jaded. I mean, you said when you first started, there were these kind of grumpy old roadies who didn't want to talk to anyone. But do you still, when you do a set and you see the crowd kind of pop and you get that, I mean, especially I would imagine at something like Glastonbury where everyone is just
massive.
Like you get this
buzz.
Huge communal like roar of people, and they're kind of dancing to the sound that you've helped create. Like, does that still kind of fill you with that thing you got all those years
absolutely
ago?
Not every single night, not every single night, but yeah, it definitely, and like doing sound, it's not just about that. I do lots of other stuff that's so boring you'd never even think about doing a podcast about it. There's lots of stuff that we do that is really dull and really boring, but obviously there's lots of stuff that seems really exciting to the outsider, if you like. But there's no doubt about it, in music particularly, there is an energy, like there's an adrenaline that comes from that live show, and for me that's never really, if anything, it's actually got stronger as I feel like I've got better, and I feel like if I'm working with a team that's really strong, then that even gets better. And if the artist, I think like the heights are still to come.
Yeah.
Even though I look back and think, God, I don't know if I could ever beat that. I kind of still think.
Still want to.
I still think, there's going to be opportunities,
Yeah.
Yeah, and when I say not every night, because when you're on a tour,
no.
It's like, sometimes it just don't click. But so go on.
So did it kind of manage to scratch that itch that you had when you wanted to be up on stage?
It
Do you ever
did.
feel like you're kind of, sometimes you're like, I'm actually part of the band, you know what I mean? Especially when it's really kind of kicking off. Do you ever get that sort of like, it's all happening? And
I've definitely had more of a buzz, more of a success of being behind a mixing desk, so I'm going with that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I go with that. So it's not about feeling like I'm part of the band. It's just feeling like I'm helping all of the audience just have an amazing memory.
Yeah.
That's kind of what it is. It's all, for me, it's all about kind of keeping the band happy or the artist happy by translating what the message that they want to get across, and then making all of the punters happy by just giving them the best night they can have, by making it just sound crystal and have all of the emotion that it needs to have, the lifts and the dips, and I try to feed off the audience a bit. Sometimes that can be a bit detrimental, because if it's not quite vibing, you can start to think, is it me? And of course it isn't, you know. So you have to be careful not to become too self-obsessed, you know what I mean? It can't be all about the buzz that you're having.
Yeah.
Even though, like, undoubtedly you do get a thrill from it.
Yeah, of course. So what was it that led you, because you're working for yourself now, freelancing. What was it, and how did that come about? What was it that made you kind of take that decision?
Money.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
That's simple.
Pretty much. Well, yeah, really.
I mean,
don't get me wrong. I mean, there's so much magic in this industry and the thrill of mixing about, but I'll just do it for money, really. Got to pay them bills.
Sure.
The freelance thing was, it was a big step. You know, it's going alone, but it had to be done. You know, I was at that stage where I was. There weren't any bigger jobs at that firm that I could be trusted with. But I was also being called upon to fill the diary with all the other little bits and pieces, so that I just didn't have any control over my own time. So, you know, you'd go and do a tour for 6 weeks, but then you'd come back and you'd be straight back in the warehouse prepping jobs and getting them out the door.
Yeah.
Anyone that's been on tour knows that you need at least a week to get home, and they call it decompressing. You know, you to get your head straight, because it is quite an unusual thing to go through, especially if you're not used to it. So yeah, it was a big step. It was a big step, but the time was right. I wanted more control over my time, and I wanted a bit more money in my pocket. Wanted to maybe work a bit less, but have the same amount of money in my pocket as well. Do you know what I mean? Yeah,
of course.
I was working so much. I don't remember, like, half of my 20s. I missed everything. All the parties, all the weddings, all the birthdays, all the family dues, you know. I was working a lot.
Yeah. I mean, but that's
what it...
That's fair enough. And with a family of your own now, you kind of need to sort of start to prioritise that as much as you want to provide for them. You need to actually see them as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we're going through that at the moment. We're going through that transition. Yeah. We're figuring out how that's going to work. That's been the source of a bit of anxiety, I have to admit. But it's also quite... positively, it's a challenge. You know, it's a new challenge. So it's something to look forward to.
And you've got some pretty decent clients. Yep. We were talking about Katherine Jenkins is one of your clients.
Katherine is one of my favourite clients. She's brilliant.
Yeah, right, okay.
She really is.
And, I mean, again, very different from where you started off, but and I imagine the shows are a bit more subdued to that night at Brixton Academy with Bush. But, you know, how's the Katherine Jenkins tour?
So we did a tour this year in May. 1 month, UK... 2 on. She's an opera singer, so no more than 2 shows in a row. So 2 on, 1 off. 2 on, 1 off. We didn't have any lighting rig at all, hardly. So it was just, we had a PA system, little sound crew, 1 lighting guy, and then like a stage manager and a catering crew. Lovely small little team, promoter, and everybody was lovely. Everybody was really cool. And we'd roll in at 9 o'clock in the morning. We'd be all done and dusted, ready for the orchestra at midday. And it was one of the best tours I've ever done. It was just awesome. Everybody was so like the stage manager was like monitor guy for Liam Gallagher,
right?
You know, like the production manager. The stage manager was a backline tech from John Emery's who works with Bros and all that stuff. You know, like it's a real mix of people. My system engineer has done like the Killers and Mumford and Sons, and he's out with Ozzy Floyd at the moment. You know, it's a real mix of people, and we're all on this classical gig with this sort of really eccentric conductor who comes in every day. He's kind of like, you know, like getting us to move things around, and just like the banter's a bit of a it's kind of when 2 worlds collide, like where the rock and roll world meets the classical world. So you can imagine what the banter was like. But it was brilliant. We just had such a good time, and you know, the shows sounded beautiful, and she was great with everybody, and yeah, it was really good. It was lovely to do like just a really quiet show every night as well, because my ear, I felt like at the end of the tour my ears were refreshed. Yeah, I wasn't exhausted, you know, I wasn't tired. Every night we were just mixing it at like 85 dB, peaking at 90 dB, really soft and soothing. I mean, the music is not all to my taste.
Yeah,
but yeah, it was excellent. She's great. You know, I've got a little bottle of Grey Goose, a signed bottle of Grey Goose at the end of the tour. Yeah.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah.
And also Nick Mason from Pink Floyd as well. And now I just love Pink Floyd.
Do you?
So much. So that would be, like, for me, that would be very, very exciting.
I must admit, I was excited to be asked.
Yeah. Are you a big Floyd fan?
I used to be a big Floyd fan, yeah. So it was Dark Side of the Moon, obviously. That was the first one I discovered. I think I was like, I must have been like 17, 18. Dark Side of the Moon, and then like Medal, and then The Wall, and I just loved The Wall. Gilmour,
so
and you like Gilmour solos, and it was just I mean, that's a big kind of, when you discover Pink Floyd, if you're into music, that's like you know, it's a big shift, isn't it? So to be asked to work with Nick was, that was humbling.
Yeah. That's a sort of feather in the cap. I mean, you know, like
I suppose so. Yeah.
You know, it's one of those ones you go. And again, I mean, they're just talking about sound. Pink Floyd is just one of the most glorious sounding
I know.
things.
The pressure. Can you imagine?
Yeah. So did you think I have to try and get this guy sounding how he's used to sounding?
I think I got the gig based on the drum sound that I got on Chris Rea's tour.
Right.
So they were getting a lot of compliments about the sound quality on Chris, and there were a lot of people were talking about the sound of the drums as well, particularly. And the guys were like watching YouTube clips back of the shows, and they kept saying how the guys in the band, they were like, I've never been able to hear the drums like this through a phone before, you know, like they could, you know. So there was a bit of a buzz about that, and then there was the same production manager that did Chris got the Nick Mason gig.
Yeah.
And Nick Mason's manager is Tony Smith, who used to manage Genesis, or he still manages Phil Collins. He's a legend.
Yeah,
right. This guy's like, people wait at the stage door to meet him, you know. And I think they already had a team in mind, but Pat Baker, the production manager, I think insisted that they give me a chance because he knew about this drum sound thing that I was doing. And they did. They gave me a crack of the whip, and they were really happy with it. But we started off with two tiny little shows, one at Dingwalls, which is basically just a comedy club nowadays. Yeah. I think the last band I saw there was The Bravery about 15 years ago. Yeah, do you remember that?
Yeah.
And then we did a show at Dingwalls, and we did 2 nights at the Half Moon in Putney. And the idea was that so it's Nick Mason, Gary Kemp, Guy Pratt, who plays bass for Gilmour, and Lee Harris, who's like used to be in the Blockheads, I think, and Don Becken, programmer and keyboard player. And they had a vibe in the band where they wanted the first couple of shows to be real, like, pub gigs, right? But they wanted their arena backline, you know. So they wanted their high watt stacks and like 10 keyboards and the keyboard racks and like, you know, like 6 tom drum kit and all this with a giant gong behind Nick. And everybody's like, it can't be done, you know, it can't be done. We can't do this. We can't put this in Dingwalls. We can't put this in a pub. And then they were like, well, we got to, because that's what we want to do. You've got to try and make it happen. And so Pat rung round a few mates, called in a few favours, got me on board, and we did it. When we made it happen, and the sound check in Dingwalls was an interesting one, because we'd been mixing it in a studio. Pre-production, we were all in a rehearsal studio. I was in the room with the guys with a mixer, and I had near-field monitors and headphones and that. And I built my mix during their rehearsals, so I still didn't really know. I hadn't really heard the set from start to finish properly when we went in to do that first show. And I was just, you know, I was just praying that it was all going to translate through this old broken PA system in Dingwalls, you know. But thankfully, it was all right. It ended up quite loud in there. I think it was. I think it was a bit. It was a bit too loud. Right. But it worked. It was a really good night. And then we did the Half Moon, which was even better. And then that was it. They were like, okay, we've got a production here. We're going to do it. You know, that was when they decided that until they'd done those shows, they weren't sure if they were even going to do the tour, and then they decided, right, we're going to keep the crew together, we're going to do it, and then they booked the tour, and we went out and did it. We did like 4 weeks in the UK, 4 weeks in Europe, and then they booked a US tour, and we went out and did 7 weeks out there, and then we come back and we did a month in Italy, as I was saying earlier about,
Nice.
we did amphitheatres in Italy.
Wow, that's quite a good way to come full circle, I think, to sort of wrap stuff up from Italy to Italy. Before you go, though, I always ask everyone, come the end of the podcast, best and worst day on the job ever?
Oh, best and worst day ever. Probably in the same day, I think, because the worst is when you think, this is not going to come together, isn't it? Is this actually going to be the day where this doesn't happen?
Yeah,
this is not going to happen, and then it happens, and you hit it out of the park, and you're like, shit, this is so, and I've had a few of them.
Yeah,
I can possibly choose one.
Oh, really? Okay. All right, but surely a best day. There must be one day. Is there a day
behind the desk
that you look back on and you go, "Fucking hell, that feels like."
I feel really lucky. I've had a few moments where I've really sat back and felt like that. I've got to be honest. There was one day at Glastonbury. Elbow played on the Sunday.
Yeah,
and I wasn't mixing. I was just, like I said, I was looking after front of house, and it was the Sunday afternoon set, and the sun was going down behind the pyramid, and an Elbow came out and just opened up. It just sounded incredible. It just sounded amazing, and they played all the anthems, and Guy just had the whole field. He had them in his hand. It's like 100,000 people. All as far as the eye could see, people were feeling it. They were feeling the music. Like 150 metres away, 200 metres away, they're singing along. So you've done your job.
Yeah.
You know that the artist's message is being transmitted to everybody. So that was a really. I remember sitting back feeling quite emotional. I might even have had a little bit of a lump in my throat.
That's all right.
It's because I was thinking about the loadout. So that was a big one. Sure. And I wasn't even mixing.
Yeah.
Goldfrapp at the Royal Albert Hall.
That was incredible.
That was incredible.
You mentioned Royal Albert Hall a couple of times, and I was going to say how
it was a tough day.
But I mean, as a fan, every time I go to Royal, I think Royal Albert Hall's probably the best venue. Well, it's probably the best venue in terms of the sound, and wherever you stand, wherever you sit, wherever you are, you get the show. I think it might be the best venue of that sort of size. And
it's notorious for being one of the trickiest to mix in as well.
Is it?
It's funny that, but I mean, I've seen some of my favourite shows there. I saw Mogwai there.
Wow.
And they sounded incredible in there. But
I bet.
It was just incredible. Yeah, it's an amazing hall. I've been fortunate enough to mix in there a lot, actually. I've done a lot of orchestras in there, and I got to do Goldfrapp in there, and that was special. And that was tricky. That was a tough day because everything building up to the show, we were rehearsing. We'd not really done enough production rehearsals because they were trying to save a bit of money. So we were still putting stuff together. We had a choir that we didn't really get until we got them in the hall. We'd not really had a chance to dial them up properly.
Yeah.
And when we were sound checking and everything, I had all these lush reverbs set up on her voice and everything that we'd been using for the tour. But that room's got its own 7-second lush reverb.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I've got to just take it all away. So I was just going through sound check and I was just taking things away, taking away the reverbs on her voice, drying everything up a bit, and then putting the actual dry sounds back into the hall. And letting the hall feel it. And at first it was really nerve-wracking because it was such a big shift to how I'd been approaching the rest of the tour. And I only had a couple of hours to get it together. And then, towards the end of the sound check, it all just starts to come together, and then they stop and you think, okay, well, that's where we are. We're where we are, so let's see how it goes. And I remember my missus come and met me before the show, and we were sat like underneath front of house. It's like a little bar bit. If anyone knows the Albert Hall, they'll know where I mean.
Yeah.
And she had a glass of wine. She was like, "Do you want a beer?" I was like, "No, absolutely not." So I just have a sparkling water. I just sat there, and she's like, "Are you all right?" And I couldn't speak. I couldn't talk to her. And I'd never been like that. She said she'd never ever seen me that nervous before. I'd never felt like that before. I was absolutely bricking it, just because of the gravitas that had been put on the show, and then. when it started, it just sounded awesome, and then it was just, we were in, and it was probably one of the best nights of my life.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's great.
There you go.
Well, Steve, thanks very much for coming on the podcast. It's been
You're welcome.
Lovely chatting to you, and
Thanks.
Good luck with everything. Good luck with getting back to Liverpool Street and picking the fam up. Good luck with the I've kept you a bit longer than I said I was going to. I apologise for that, but
right.
It's been lovely chatting to you, and
you too.
Wherever the world of music takes you, I hope you carry on doing great things.
Thank you very much.
Lovely. Thank you,
nice
mate.
one.
Thank you.
Cheers.
All right, so there you go. That was Steve Carr, a man who has, as you can see, not just a lot of stories. I mean, I love getting people on who just have a real passion for their job. And I think you could probably hear just through Steve's voice that he still maintains the passion that he had for music and working in live music and creating sound and creating memories for people that he did, when he was a kid and when he first discovered Nirvana. And I think that's just, such a lovely thing. I hope I have that as well. I hope you do as well. I think music and live music is just such an amazing, brilliant world to exist in, and it's great when you meet someone who really feels like they appreciate their job and really enjoys what they do and is obviously very, very good at it. To be able to work with, the likes of mixing BB King, to getting a lump in your throat, to working with Albert Glastonbury, that's what a brilliant way to live your life, and he obviously is well aware of that. And I very, very much enjoy talking to Steve, and I hope we get some guests who are just as passionate as that coming up in later episodes of the podcast, and I'm sure we will, because we will be back next week. I know, we've had a couple of weeks of downtime. There is going to be another podcast next week, I promise you that, and it will be with another superb guest from the world of music. So please do subscribe. As I said, please leave us a review, probably a nice one. Would have be much appreciated on your iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcast, and give us a follow at Road Crew Pod, or you can find us on Facebook. And like I said at the start, just drop us a line, let us know who you'd like us to speak to. If you know anyone who works in the music industry, or if you've heard of any people who are kind of legendary behind the scenes characters, just give them a shout. The least we can do is ping them an email and see if they want to have a chat with us, and if they do want to have a chat with us, then we'll get them on the show. But but that's the future. Hopefully, fingers crossed, we will be able to get a few more guests, and I won't be leaving you hanging for a fortnight anytime soon. But we will be back next week, so make sure you tune in, and I appreciate you tuning in this week. We'll see you soon. Cheery bye.
Part two.